Infinite's introduction proved to be somewhat disappointing when Sonic Forces hit the market, the character lacking in personality, presence, and a strong backstory. He appeared, did some stuff in between, and then vanished at the climax without little explanation, being forgotten by the characters and most likely the audience. Despite his lackluster first appearance, however, I learned to enjoy Infinite for the potential he can bring to future games, having interesting abilities, a backstory that can easily be expanded upon, and his relationship with a certain character. Sonic? No. The Avatar? No. Shadow the Hedgehog, the ultimate life form. While I can understand the idea of wanting to pair up Infinite with the Avatar in future games, Shadow and Infinite have the most potential for future stories revolving around the two, which could either be explored in the game or even the IDW Sonic the Hedgehog comics. This relationship was barely explored in Sonic Forces or Episode Shadow, despite having one of the best setups for a rivalry in the franchise. Perhaps I may be going through ground already treaded, so I hope this video provides a few new ideas to the conversation of Sonic Forces, as well as being a good first video on my channel. With that out of the way, let's take a look at Shadow and Infinite, potential lost and potential gained. If you're watching this video because you're a fan of the series like I am, then I'm going to assume you know the gist of Shadow the Hedgehog's backstory, but here's a recap as I'll be bringing this back up later, and I'd like to get anyone unfamiliar up to speed. Shadow was created to be the ultimate lifeform, having been made aboard the space colony Ark by Gerald Robotnik. Shadow was friends with Gerald's granddaughter, Maria, until the military group known as Gun raided the space colony, killing Maria and capturing Shadow, where he would be held on Prison Island for 50 years. After attempting to destroy the Earth with the Ark, Shadow came to his senses and now fights alongside Sonic and company. Infinite's backstory is spread out across 3 pieces of media: Sonic Forces, the episode Shadow DLC, and the Sonic Forces prequel comics written by Ian Flynn. Infinite was the leader of Jackal Squad, a band of mercenaries who one day decided to raid one of Dr. Eggman's secret bases in the desert. After an incident involving the Phantom Ruby, a reality-warping gemstone that the Doctor had found moments before the squad's arrival, Infinite decided to join the Doctor, having saw a vision of the world on fire and wanting to see this vision come true for his own sick gain. Jackal Squad was assigned to a laboratory in the Mystic Jungle, where Shadow the Hedgehog would soon arrive to the facility in search of the laboratory, destroying Jackal Squad off-screen and proceeding through the jungle. Infinite would soon arrive to challenge the Hedgehog, only to be disposed of rather easily. With his pride shattered, Infinite would take up a metal mask and the Phantom Ruby, aiding Dr. Eggman in his conquest of the planet. Utilizing other media to enhance a game's story is perfectly fine, however, when story moments that would be important to the story are placed into this media and are required for a better understanding of the main plot, it becomes an issue. In fact, the first prequel comic is pointless since it just follows a nameless resistance soldier, of whom we never see again. The next comic only serves to explain why Silver is back. The third is entirely pointless since episode Shadow covers this story. And the fourth one, explaining why Infinite joins with Eggman, is really the only one with substance. Why couldn't the prequel comics have just been entirely about Infinite? Infinite joining with Dr. Eggman should have been something we see in episode Shadow, or better yet, told to us during the main story and elaborated on in either DLC or the prequel comic. Jackal Squad being killed is another part of the story we needed more context on. We don't need to see blood and body parts flying across the jungle, but brief glimpses of the squad fighting Shadow would set them up as formidable opponents and building up the confrontation between Shadow and Infinite. Perhaps similar to how Maria's death was portrayed in Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow the Hedgehog, with brief flashes to that moment. Having an actual boss fight between Shadow and Infinite also would have established that he was a threat to be taken seriously, and I feel as though having him put up a fight only to be beaten would have been more of a push for his character. With Shadow being the driving force to push Infinite into donning his mask and the Phantom Ruby, he ultimately adds nothing to the main story other than informing the Resistance that the villains they had been fighting were actually copies created by the Phantom Ruby. Other than the rope fans of the adventure games into buying a copy of Sonic Forces, what other purpose is there in creating copies of past villains? None of their specific abilities are truly utilized to provide an edge over the Resistance, and no one ever questions why characters like Shadow or Chaos, 2 villains reformed, are once again working for Dr. Eggman. The story could have used copies of Infinite himself, and little would actually change. In fact, Infinite's abilities tend to lean more towards the bizarre and the nonsensical, opting for a red filter over the screen with red cubes hovering across the room, with the occasional winding snake in the sky on Long Boys. Using his powers to create stuff like the snake platforms for the Long Boys are cool and trippy, however, seeing Infinite use his abilities to directly target a person's memories and fears would have been a much better use of the Phantom Ruby in my opinion. We only see hints of this in episode Shadow, with Infinite pretending to be Rouge and Omega while mocking Shadow via communication. You would think that out of anyone from the main cast, Shadow would be the prime target of Infinite's wrath, putting the Hedgehog through a hoary experience to break his spirit, but all that really happens is Shadow running through Green Hill with red cubes and a few strange pieces of dialogue from the Phantom Ruby copies of Rouge and Omega. Really using your creativity there, Sonic Team. An excuse to do anything you want with the story and level design, and this is all we get. Very cool. Another problem with Infinite is how inconsistent his characterization and motives are, having been spread out across 3 pieces of media. In episode Shadow, he says that Shadow tore down an Eggman base without a second thought, implying that Shadow had been careless and that Infinite was more of a victim than an enemy, putting him at more of a sympathetic angle. Even his theme song is casting him more in a sad, changed character who suffered greatly. However, in the main story and the prequel comics, Infinite is rotten to the core, only caring for power and death. Also, the characters act as if Infinite was created in a lab in a test tube, namely at the beginning when Infinite was placed into a tube, and during Last Judgment where Amy mentions Infinite's creation. The backstory and motives mostly fit together, yet it still feels as though the people behind Infinite just didn't know what to do with him, and they just took a handful of ideas to make him, rather than having a unified vision. Shadow's involvement in Infinite's story is another issue I wanted to discuss. Not necessarily his role as a whole, but I am referring to a small scene in the episode Shadow DLC, right after Eggman's facility. It's this line right here, after Shadow completely wrecks Infinite.
Worthless. Don't show your pathetic face around me ever again.
Now, what's wrong with this scene? Well, let me put it this way. An agent sent by what is presumably the government is invading a Robotnik-owned laboratory in which the agent kills the people located in the facility. The only one left standing is scared and alone, only to be insulted to his face, in which this moment pushes him off the deep end, causing him to do horrible things. Yeah, given Shadow's backstory, this moment comes off as incredibly nasty and downright evil. While Jackal Squad were seen as the enemy, Shadow had no idea if these people were just plain evil or just normal goons who were in over their heads. Given Shadow's development throughout his early appearances, you would think Shadow would have a greater appreciation for other people's lives, especially in people like him who could be redeemed and changed for the better. I have nothing against Shadow killing. In fact, he is definitely the type of character who will kill for the greater good, and some people like Black Doom or Mephiles simply won't change their ways. However, Shadow didn't know anything about Jackal Squad, pretty much bundling them together with any other badnik he's faced, not even giving a second thought to what he's done. I honestly think that's kind of despicable. No, Sonic Team, I don't think Shadow is cool because he offed a group of people and mocked their leader. I just think you made Shadow an unheroic, laughably edgy stereotype of a character I actually like. However, other than that one little moment of evil behavior, Shadow killing Jackal Squad can offer some great possibilities for storytelling. Shadow feeling as though he's sunk into the level of Maria's killer, asking himself if he's truly changed, and putting the burden of stopping Infinite on himself out of guilt. Believing that the war was essentially his fault for pushing Infinite into taking on his new persona, and maybe a bit of fallout between him and the other members of the Resistance who question his actions. They had a fantastic moment to give Shadow a new story, and they botched the landing. Very cool. Shadow and Infinite have a great setup to be reflections of one another, having very similar backstories but turning out very differently. While some people may want Infinite to be a redeemed villain a la Shadow Sonic Adventure 2, I honestly don't want that. I want Infinite to stay rotten to the core, entirely selfish and looking out for himself, a manipulator who uses people's emotions and their trauma to create illusions, and even using his own backstory to get pity only to stab people in the back. Despite his rough beginnings, I still want to see Infinite return in a future installment to the series or even an appearance in the Sonic IDW comics, to tell stories and flesh out his character. Despite their differences, Shadow and Infinite ultimately come from two very similar backstories, dark-furred loners who had lost people close to them and opted to take their frustrations out on the world around them. The difference between the two, however, is morals. Shadow was never out to destroy the planet for anything the world did to him, but rather that the world had taken the lives of people who did nothing wrong, redeeming himself upon remembering the wish of a friend, and keeping watch over the planet she loved. Infinite, on the other hand, is entirely selfish in his motivations, merely wanting to be the best there is and lashing out when someone is able to outdo him. He cares for no one other than himself and wants to watch the world burn for the fun of it. I think what makes Infinite more interesting than Mephiles is the fact that he isn't some godly being, but just a normal guy with extremely violent behavior and a lust for blood. Infinite hasn't appeared in any type of media after the release of Sonic Forces, outside of a plushie that had been delayed at the time of this video. And I hope that Sonic Team doesn't plan on just throwing him away while someone as bland and unnecessary as Zavok gets to stick around in the franchise. Yeah, two popular characters from the adventure games get barely anything to do in Sonic Forces, and yet this big red loser gets the title of first boss. Okay, Sonic Team. If Infinite does return, I want the writers and the developers to use his abilities in ways that have more meaning, targeting the other characters' fears and preying on their negative emotions, particularly on a certain ultimate life form with plenty of tragedies to pick and choose from. Shadow and Infinite have so much potential for a rivalry, finally giving Shadow someone to butt heads with other than Dr. Eggman or Sonic. You don't need a big dumb alien for an archenemy or a shadow monster with the voice of Dan Green. All that you need is a simple jackal with an axe to grind and a Phantom Ruby for some good old-fashioned metal scarring.